Guess what? I slept like a baby. My stomach has been upset for 2 days. Everything I eat gives me an upset stomach. But this has been going on now for a whole year, ever since the old guy that used to be a butler, great guy, great human being. We had a great relationship. I would talk to him. He would just call me when he had a problem. He was calling me, hey, when next time you're here, we saw a couple of roaches in the house. Can you treat it? Now, mind you, we're using baits. They don't want spraying in the house. It's going to take 7 to 10 days for a roach to find a bait and die. We would service it maybe every 2 months inside the house. Every 2 to 3 months, they would call it. This guy's not calling every day. The older guy died of COVID. And I was really sorry about that because we had to build a great relationship. And this new guy came in and he thinks he's God's gift to the butler business. So there are a couple of verses in the Bible that are key for me, that every time I ignore them, I pay a heavy price in my soul, in my spirit, in my physical. Scripture says that sorrow dries up the bones. If you're in a contentious relationship with your spouse, your significant other, the woman you're sleeping with, call it whatever you want. If there is contention, it eventually affects you emotionally, spiritually, and then it starts affecting your work. If you're in a partnership, I'm dealing with people who've been in partnerships who got screwed, and they're going through the same. They got stomach problems. They're getting viral problems all the time. They're getting sick. They're burned out. They've been admitted to the hospital. I'm talking to these people now. I just had a call from a young man. He's a kind Christian young man. And he says, Frank, I'm thinking of selling my business. What can I get for it? How do I market it? And I start talking to him about the process of selling. It's a small business. He probably doesn't have more than $150,000 a year in revenue. It's not going to be worth much. Then I see a post that he was burned out. He had unrealistic expectations. People had unrealistic expectations about him. He had unrealistic expectations about the business. He was pushing himself too hard. And he needed to take a week away, spend some time with God, and get perspective so that he can come back and do what he loves, because he loves the business. He loves the industry. I called him and I said, bro, here's my number. Call me. Let's do a podcast together about that experience. There's so many people going through that. I went through it. Not everybody has the DNA to build a big business because of the things that you have to do, of the hard pills you got to swallow, of self-limiting beliefs that you have to overcome, which I've had plenty. And everything revolves around relationships. So sorrow dries up the bones. The blessing of the Lord makes you rich and doesn't bring sorrow with it. So you have to analyze that every time that you're experiencing sorrow over something is because that's not a blessing of the Lord. Don't confuse that with hard work. I don't mind putting in 80 hours a week. And 80 hours a week for me flies because I'm doing what I love. It's when I have to deal with sorrowful decisions that I made. I hired the wrong person. That's on me. Now I have to fire that person, and that affects their life. No, they fired themselves. No, I made a wrong hiring decision. I saw things in that person that I knew wouldn't work out in the long term, but because I needed a warm body, I hired them anyway. And what we got to do is we got to find people who are a fit for our personality, our style, our management. Most people have never managed people. I have. But I ignore the signals. You ignore the warnings, the red flags in the relationship. You ignore the warnings when you're selling the account because your salesman kicks in. And when you hire a salesman and he needs to make $300,000 to $500,000 a year in revenue, You can't muzzle an ox while he's treading. That is a biblical. So you have to have the infrastructure to be able to hire, because he's going to grow that business, and you can't muzzle an ox while he's treading. Biblical principles. Sorrow dries up the bones. Don't overwork to become rich. You're putting in too many hours, neglecting your home, neglecting your kids. I never did. Everything I did worked around me, my family. The way I structured my business was to make sure that nobody was neglected. You can't be all things to all people. And we all have to struggle with those decisions. These are tough decisions. The problem that you have is you have the glorification of entrepreneurship, where you have all of these marketers and people selling courses on how to run successful business. The problem is they've never actually run a business. They are consultants to consultants who are consulting other people on how to be consultants. That's literally the game now. You can't hack it in the real world, so you become a consultant. I had a guy who told me he burned out and he became a consultant to dads. And I said, listen, I went through all that. I barely work 30 hours a week now. I got more time than I know what to do with. I made more money in the last year than I did in the previous 5 years. And I worked half the time. I honestly don't need your service. Thank you. Everybody's going through this. What you have is people selling you a pipe dream of what entrepreneurship is. We're not selling, if you're selling software and you're selling courses, yeah, it's easy to scale. It's easy to scale. When you're talking about traditional brick and mortar businesses and traditional service business, the average business makes no more in America. The average small business makes in America no more than $500,000 a year at their best. They're under 5 employees. For a pest control business to do over $1 million and have over 10 people, you have to play the game. Lately, we decided I'm going to be a salesman again. I'm going to put on my salesman hat. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to sell it. I'm going to service as much as I can, build it up, and I'm hiring already by the end of the year. After the summer, I'm going to build round number 3 up again, and I'm going to be a salesman. But all this experience, all this last week, in the last 2 weeks, made me realize the company I don't want to be like. So then I put safeguards in place so I don't become that company. Having a conversation with a young man who's been having a great relationship for the last 2 years. He's become a great friend. He's one of those guys that calls me every single day to see how I'm doing. But he's a shark. Let's not kid ourselves. He's a way better salesperson than me. But part of what makes him a great salesperson is that when he's in sales mode, he's a shark. He's a lion. He does not care about whether you can afford it, whether you want it or not. He's going to be a salesman. And he's got his own history of why he's that way. And I've been ministering to his life because he's riddled with anxiety all the time. And I deal with so many people who are riddled with anxiety. And I've been riddled with anxiety, and I learned how to manage it so I don't have anxiety anymore. So I deal with the anxiety. I make better decisions.